1 year of Charli XCX's Brat album cover. Haim have a new single on the way, and I react to more albums that you think are a 10 out of 10. That and more coming up on the Pop Pod. I am Pop Sam Cam. I hope you are having a good day wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this podcast, I would love for you to follow or subscribe to it. If you like this podcast, I would love for you to follow or subscribe to it so you can be with me every day. Or you can also see me on YouTube where I post the video versions of this podcast as well. Also, throw a 5-star rating in the mix if you feel like it. Let's get on to the headlines. Haim have announced that they have another new single coming out on Friday. This one's called Everybody's Trying to Figure Me Out, and here's a little snippet.
Squatters' rights. I'll be the gatekeeper for the rest of my life. I don't want your charity. Spend the night in the cold if it keeps me free.
This follows on from Relationships, the song that they dropped a couple of weeks ago. This one feels like it's a little bit rougher than that one. I am super excited to hear it. I'm assuming all this is leading to a new album, which will be their first since 2020's Women in Music Part 3. Another new song that's coming on Friday is the Dare's LCA, which he has announced will be dropping. This is his first song since he released his debut album, What's Wrong with New York.
I just wanna shake it up tonight. I shouldn't push the button, but I'm not.
The Dare, of course, also produced Charli XCX's Guess with Billie Eilish and has had a huge moment with that. Dua Lipa has been covering songs from artists of the country that she's in on her Radical Optimism tour. She's currently in New Zealand and she took the chance to cover Royals by Lorde. It's been 1 year since Charli XCX dropped the album cover for Brat. I mean, usually I wouldn't put this into a news segment for an album cover, but this one stirred up so much when it was released. Many fans thought that she was joking. They thought it was a placeholder, and it started so much discussion. But a year later, how can you deny that this album cover is anything but incredible? It stirred up so much buzz for the album and became like its own iconic symbol separate to the album itself. There was, of course, the Brat wall that launched it all. And since then, it's been put on everything from t-shirts to presidential campaigns. Brat green could basically be a Pantone color now. It has done so much. And I think it is so funny that we can go back to that moment when it dropped and everybody thought that there must be something wrong with it. I even remember the pixelated nature of it had people thinking that it was definitely just computer generated placeholder. Turned out to be by far her most iconic album cover and by far the most iconic album cover in pop music last year.
Birds of a feather, we should stick together. I know I said I'd never think I wasn't better alone.
Let's move on to the charts where Billie Eilish in her 320th week on the Spotify global charts has moved up one spot to number 2 with Birds of a Feather. I just think it is incredible the longevity that this song is having. It's probably going to go down as her kind of trademark song. And it's also, I think, going to go down as one of the classics of the American songbook. We're going to talk about this song for years and years to come. It's the sort of one that's still going to be playing on radio in 40 years' time because it has that timeless, nature to it as well. It doesn't feel attached to any particular time period with its production. It's just a beautifully written song and it just continues to capture people's hearts. I don't know when this song will start fading from the charts, but it's showing absolutely no sign of doing so. We've also got Wildflower from the record as well, still going strong at number 17. That's also almost a year old. I think that she's made something truly classic here, Billie Eilish, with this record. The UK charts have announced what the biggest songs of the year are so far, given that we are now 25% into 2025, and it's Messy by Lola Young.
'Cause I'm too messy, and then I'm too fucking clean.
That is currently leading the charts, which I think is pretty incredible, given that only a couple months ago, not many people had heard of Lola Young, and now she is an absolute star in her own right. There's also Apate by Roux and Bruno Mars in at number 2. And then we've got Gracie Abrams' That's So True at number 3, Lady Gaga and Bruno Mars' Die With A Smile at 4, and Crystal's The Days at number 5, which if you're in the US is probably a track you're not that familiar with because it is a dance track that's captured the hearts of people in Australia and the UK. The main part of the podcast today, I'm going to be reacting to albums that you've said are a 10 out of 10 and telling you whether I think they are a 10 out of 10 as well. I did this a couple weeks ago. You can find that in the old episodes of the podcast, but I've got a whole new bunch here to react to today. So let's go. These are albums that you think are a 10 out of 10. But what do I think they are? The first one is Christina Aguilera's Bionic. I guess this could be considered as her first flop album. She'd come off the back of Back to Basics, which had some sizable hits. And this one really failed to gain any momentum. Not Myself Tonight, the lead single, was kind of seen as being quite abrasive to people as Christina Aguilera stepped into this more electronic sound. She was inspired by artists like MIA and really didn't smooth that down at all. She just went right into it. And to be honest, I think this, looking back on it, is a really good album. I think there are some really exciting stuff at the top of it, particularly. I think Elastic Love is really good. And I also think that Woohoo is quite good as well. I think that it loses its way a little bit through the middle. I'm not a huge fan of Sex for Breakfast, but there's also a real kind of like vulnerable nature to this album that you don't think about when you think about Bionic because the promotion for it was so outlandish. But she teams up with Sia for the first time, and this was Sia's first time kind of writing with major pop stars. And together they did this like trio of songs right in the middle of the record that I think are just so good. I think that You Lost Me is one of Christina Aguilera's best ballads.
I feel like a world's being infected.
And I also really like how they approached motherhood on a song like All I Need. I feel like it gives the album this light and shade that it needed. So I'm not sure that I'm going to go full 10 out of 10 with this, but I am going to go underrated on this. The next one is Ray of Light by Madonna. I mean, I kind of asked for albums that you were saying were 10 out of 10, but not many others would say. I feel like Ray of Light is one that many people would say is a 10 out of 10, and for good reason. I think this is such an incredible reinvention by Madonna. She teamed up with William Orbit, was very inspired by the dance sound that was going on in Europe and the UK as well, rather than what was happening in America. And I think took a pretty bold leap with this album as well. Like, obviously Madonna is no stranger to doing things that are bold, but the dance sound wasn't being explored in this way by many, if any, major pop stars, and she just went full throttle into it and people got it. Like, people picked this up. It was quite a departure from the previous record, Bedtime Stories, but you've also got to remember that in the middle of Bedtime Stories and Ray of Light is Evita, which is probably like one of her most classic sort of roles that she's ever given. So to then go into this really experimental dance record is quite a leap, and I just think it is exciting from start to finish. I think it is her 10 out of 10 record. To me, it's the best Madonna record. I think that the title track is just frantic and furious and so engaging. I think that Nothing Really Matters is just pure pop done brilliantly. I think Frozen feels like it just takes you in and just like envelops you in this really cold, dark, haunting world. And then I also think that The Power of Goodbye is a brilliant ballad. Then you've also got moments like Swim, which like are really kind of wade through this William Orbit electronic sound really successfully. And then my personal favorite is Sky Fits Heaven, which those rollicking like drums after the chorus get me every time. This is just such a burst of energy and such an incredible record. The next one is Lorde's Solar Power. This is obviously quite a divisive album. It comes many years after the release of Melodrama and sees Lorde departure from that dark pop sound that she'd kind of almost invented, or at least really made her brand, into something much more on the surface sunny and light. There are guitars on this record. It's more acoustic than anything that she did on Melodrama. She kind of takes us out of the club that she had us in on Melodrama and puts us on the beach. And for many people, that was incredibly disorienting. For me, this is actually one of my favorite albums from the year that it was released. I think it was released in 2021, if I'm right. Let me just double check that. 2021. I don't read it as being a super positive, upbeat, sunny album. I actually read it as being quite dark and using the sunshine as like medication or an antidote for some pretty intense stuff that's going on internally. And I think that Lorde kind of maybe provided a red herring for people in her promotion of this album, because it was promoted as being this like summery sunshine record. And I think she too like over-explained things in terms of how she said that Mood Ring was a parody of wellness culture. But I think when you're going through darker things, you look to wellness culture to find some kind of answer or some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, and things that may seem ridiculous to you and that you can poke holes in generally suddenly become something that you want to access.
I can't feel a thing. I keep looking at my mood ring.
I don't know if this is my read, but I just feel like she's really going through it on this album. She's reckoning with her past on songs like California. She's reckoning with her role as being kind of like a, I guess, martyr of some sorts, or like a leader for many people in a song like The Path. And then it just gets even darker as well, I think. Stoned at the Nail Salon is so existential. Oceanic Feeling is existential as well. Big Star is a song for I believe, a dog that has passed away. And then Fallen Fruit is kind of this protest anthem for a world that's falling apart at the seams, like in terms of the climate and just the general like environmental degradation of everything. The whole thing feels quite depressing to me. So it's interesting that people are like, oh no, our dark pop queen went like sunny suddenly. The sunniness is really a trick for something much darker that's going on this album. And I've always read it that way, and I've always loved it. I feel like the writing is some of the most straightforward that she's ever done, particularly on California, when she talks about winning that Grammy for the first time and how everything in her life just changed, but maybe not for the better. I think that the lyricism that she brings to a song like Dominoes is so pointed and funny as well. I just really enjoyed the sound as well that she brought to this. She referenced people like Natalie Imbruglia and S Club 7, and I guess because that's kind of my childhood, that's quite nostalgic to me. I don't think I'd say Solar Power is a 10 out of 10 record. It doesn't match up with Melodrama for me, but it is a very good album to my ears. The next one is an album that was similarly, I guess, promoted in a kind of strange way, and it sort of set the era off on the wrong foot. That is Dua Lipa's Radical Optimism. Just like Lorde came off the back of Melodrama, a really well-received record, Dua was coming off the back of Future Nostalgia. It was this like pure pop injection with just really well-written songs that all hit, like, and it was dropped at the right time in the middle of the pandemic. I've talked about Future Nostalgia and it turning 5 years old on a previous episode of the podcast. But on this one, I guess what she wanted to tell us was that she'd made this really personal psychedelic pop record with a band or an act that she really loves in Tame Impala, and that it was going to be quite a departure from future nostalgia. And I just don't think it plays that way to me.
They say I come and I go. Tell me all the ways you need me. I'm not here for long. Catch me or I go Houdini.
It's still upbeat dance pop. I don't know if it really gets as personal as she says it does, except for on perhaps a song like the closer Happy For You, which I think is some of her best work on this record. I feel like really this record, if it was marketed differently as just being like this summer in the sun album, she almost should have done the opposite to what Lorde did and marketed it as a summer dance record. And I think then it kind of really stands up. These songs are really enjoyable and they slide by really easily, particularly songs like These Walls and also What You're Doing and Anything for Love. Those are songs that have just grown and grown on me. And even the kind of cheekiness that she shows in the bridge of End of an Era, I think shows a different dimension to Dua Lipa's personality and maybe more of a candidness that we didn't really get on Future Nostalgia. I don't think it's a perfect album. I don't think that it has a hit that like Future Nostalgia does. There's certainly not a Don't Start Now or a Levitating on this album. The closest she comes to it, I guess, is Houdini, and even then that kind of fell flat for me as a lead single. But I do really like moments on this. I think Falling Forever could have been a really successful single if it had been given the chance, but for some reason, this album just didn't come at the right time. I think people are kind of moving past this pure pop era, and I think that she had to dig a little deeper in terms of finding something a little bit more experimental and delivering essentially what she was talking about for it to really do the job that it needed to do. But I do like this album. I don't think it's bad by any means at all, but not a 10 out of 10. Throwing it back a little bit to one of Dua Lipa's inspirations, who is Gwen Stefani, and her debut solo record called Love Angel Music Baby. This is kind of a hard one to look back on now, because this is one of the first albums that made me really excited about pop music. It made me excited to dig into the credits and to look at the kind of producers that were across these things and to really understand the sounds and the influences and everything that was going on. Turns out that's because there was a lot of influences on here from places that maybe she shouldn't have been taking inspiration. But I like this record the most when she taps into that kind of bizarre pop mode. I'm not sure that I think Hollaback Girl is kind of a classic now, but obviously borrows very heavily from hip hop, and then the whole Harajuku Girls theme, we could have completely done without that. Like, that is nothing but just cultural appropriation looking back on it now. But when she just taps into that really oddball pop mode, that's when she absolutely shines and becomes one of the pop connoisseurs of this early 2000s era. What You Waiting For? What a bizarre lead single with just this like twisted Alice in Wonderland theme that she pulls off so well. And I think she is so bold in going for it on this song. And also with something a little bit more 80s tinged. I mean, something like Bubble Pop Electric as well is such a bizarre song that I absolutely love. Long Way to Go, the closer, is really odd as well, but really successful in what it's trying to do. I then really like the sort of more 80s moments on this record. Something like Crash and Serious, The Real Thing. I think that that 3-track run is perfect. And then the best single of all, Cool. I just love the lyrical perspective that she offers on this song. And if we're talking about 10 out of 10 pop songs, this is the one for me. Like, if you want to write a perfect song, you want to see where like songs like Style by Taylor Swift all come back to, it's Cool. Like, it's just got such an effortlessness to it that I've always gravitated to. I think that this song is perfect and the centerpiece of this record. There's just a little bit of carving away that needs to be done, which I think is true of this and another album that I'm going to talk about straight after this, which is Fergie's The Dutchess. There are just a few moments where she didn't need to culturally borrow so heavily because it comes off as incredibly inauthentic and kind of lame as well, listening back to. But for the most part, this album gets it right, and I think it's a pretty great record. Next one, as I said, is Fergie's The Dutchess. This, like Love Angel Music Baby, it comes out a couple years after it. It throws a lot at the wall. There are a lot of different styles. It is heavily rooted in hip-hop music for singles like the lead one, which is London Bridge, and also songs like Clumsy as well, and Glamorous, of course.
Flying first class, up in the sky, popping champagne, living my life.
But I think where London Bridge goes just straight in on the hip-hop thing, obviously led heavily by will.i.am, and I think it's kind of the lamest single of the bunch. Songs like Clumsy and Glamorous have this really slick sheen to it. They just feel expensive. Like the production is just dripping in gold.
Because I'm falling in love, you got me slipping on.
And I think Fergie is such a charismatic performer and singer that she can really pull off these moments so well. She has this kind of like unapologetic nature to her that really defined a lot of the pop work from the early to mid 2000s. And she kind of like personifies that for me. She also personifies the really playful and silly nature of pop in this time, something that Gwen Stefani also understood quite well. A song like Fergalicious is just absolute dribble, really, when you think of the lyrics. Just the most inessential sequence of words put together ever, and yet it's so much fun. It's so colorful. The beat is an absolute trip again. It's like Willy Wonka on acid, even more than it already is on acid, and I love that about it. But then she's always had this kind of tendency to go either into reggae or rock music, and almost 100% of the time that doesn't work for her. And they're the moments on this album that don't make it great. And I think if you take out the singles and just listen to what's left over, it's not a great record to my ear. I'm sorry, but the singles are iconic. I mean, the run is so good, from London Bridge, Fergalicious, Glamorous, Girls Don't Cry, incredible ballad, then to Clumsy, and then I think she even ends it up with Here I Come, which is probably the least impressive single of the bunch, but still like a pop hit in its own right. So an incredibly successful era for her, not an album that I will press play on and listen to all the way through all the time. Another one that I've got here is Roux. Roux's self-titled record. You would remember Roux from Bulletproof.
Been there, done that, messed around. I'm having fun. Don't put me down. I'll never let you sweep me off my feet.
And I feel like she kind of unfairly ended up becoming known as a one-hit wonder, even though this album, particularly in the UK and Australia, has a couple of hits in songs like In for the Kill, Bulletproof, Quicksand, and I think even I'm Not Your Toy was a bit of a hit as well. This is like, the 80s has become such a reference for pop music now, I think ever since kind of like Carly Rae Jepsen's Emotion and also Taylor Swift's 1989. But in 2009, Roux is going back to the 80s in a way that people weren't, and really exploring synth pop in a very different way to what artists like Katy Perry and Lady Gaga and even Beyonce were in this time. It's a much more kind of like almost computerized take on it, but also incredibly crisp, and like I just see like neon colors when I close my eyes and listen to this album. And the pop writing across it is so good. I remember just being so impressed by songs like Cover My Eyes and As If by Magic. I think that falsetto really taps into the melodic qualities of the album in just the kind of way that melts your stomach, or at least it did for mine. I really think that this is close to a 10 out of 10 pop record. I think it's totally underrated and not spoken about enough, but I think the sound that she conjured up with this is so, so good. The final one is an interesting one. Lindsay Lohan's A Little More Personal, Raw, which was her second album. Look, this is not our 10 out of 10. And whoever said it, surely you know that it's not a 10 out of 10 album, because we really could have done without rock covers like I Want You to Want Me and Edge of 17. But I will say this, out of all these kind of artists who popped up at this period, who had kind of a bit of a shaky, or you would expect, I guess, to have a bit of a shaky singing voice and not be able to sing that well. You've got to remember that Lindsay Lohan was very grouped in with an artist like Paris Hilton at this time. Lindsay actually had the chops to kind of cut her teeth in this pop rock genre and make it work for her. Like, Confessions of a Broken Heart is so melodramatic and over the top. But she really bodies that chorus, I have to say. And even a song like I Live for the Day puts her up there with the pop rock connoisseurs like Kelly Clarkson. Obviously, she can't sing like Kelly Clarkson, but she can take on the kind of chorus that Kelly Clarkson can and give pretty good returns on it, I feel like. I mean, I'm not going to go back and listen to this album very often, but when this was suggested to me and when I went back and listened to it, I wasn't that like, this is terrible about it, which is a great sign, I think. And my takeaway from it was that her voice is actually pretty good. So that is my latest round of 10 out of 10 albums. If you've got one that you think is a 10 out of 10 and you think is judged unfairly, send it to me, DM it to me, or send a voice note to popsamcam@theinterns.net, and I will do my best to get it into the next round of 10 out of 10 albums that I wrap up on. That's all that I've got for you today. Tomorrow, I'm going to look back at Beyonce's Cowboy Carter a year on and see whether it's done what Beyonce wanted it to do and whether it's been a successful era for her. If you've got any thoughts on that, you can send them to me where I told you to send the 10 out of 10 albums. Make sure you follow or subscribe to this podcast, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.